but I do want to share some thoughts with you. Australia is a very, very special country. We have a lot of resources. We have a very well-educated and highly talented population. We are a country that engages with the rest of the world, and we do it particularly well because those that we bring here settle and bring a lot of linkages which are enormously helpful. If you look back at the turn of the last century, Australia and Argentina had very similar economies. And Argentina had a higher economic outcome than even ourselves at that time. Their GDP was higher than ours. I don't get too many people comparing us with Argentina these days. And I just want to say performance has a lot to do with the way in which you are governed. And there is nobody anywhere else in the world that believes they have a responsibility to support us. I know of no overseas aid programs which are proffered to Australia to help us. We're on our own. We don't think about it, and sometimes we almost think that the rest of the world owes us a living. They don't. Our performance depends upon how we manage our own economy, the way in which we produce goods and services, and whether we are competitive. Very simple. We started to be able to get out of the difficulties of the spending money you don't have through governments back in the 50s and 60s. And for 23 years we had a government under Menzies that delivered us an extraordinarily positive outcome. And it got to a point where people took the view, oh look, it's going so well, nobody could stuff it up. And we elected a government, a Labor government, led by Gough Whitlam. Now I couldn't say anything nasty about Gough. It's just that he was a very poor manager. He had a whole lot of people in government who said, we know what's needed, and we're not worried about where the money's coming from, and we're going to spend. And you may not think about it very often, but we did. We put in place Medicare. Everybody says, isn't it good that we did that? We put in place free education, university education. We started to put in place programs to develop Australia, decentralisation. Tom Uren was running DIRD. Look, I don't have the full list of expenditure proposals, but they were enormous. When I was first elected, Steve, in 1973, Australians were perplexed. We had high levels of inflation and our economy was stuffed. And it only took a couple of years. The one thing that Hawke and Keating learnt was that you could make mistakes. And I think they were the best Labor governments we've ever seen. By the time we had Rudd and Gillard, the Labor Party had forgotten all of the lessons learned during the Keating-Hawke period. Or might I say, the lessons that should have been learnt after Whitlam. Howard came along. We governed reasonably well. The Australian economy was growing. There was money in the bank. We could start a future fund. And some people say we even gave too much tax relief. I mean, imagine being able to reduce taxes. We were being blamed because the government wasn't able to spend more money because John Howard thought it may be better to return something to the people who were paying. And very interesting if you think about it. I don't think anybody wanted to vote John Howard out. They just thought that Rudd was going to be Howard Light. Howard Light. And it didn't take long before the spendthrifts were out again. And I have to say, the spendthrifts have not changed. They can think of plenty of ways of spending money. It's not their money, but spending your money. And you can go through the list. I mean, these days, it's very simple. You've got to have a Gonski. I noticed even Gonski didn't own it the other day. But, $50 billion worth of spending that wasn't in a budget, that was promised. Spending for health, spending for disability programs, but not raising the money to pay for those initiatives. Not raising the money. And so you come to a point that you come into office with all of these sorts of commitments made, expectations, and you say, gee, we'd like to be able to try and deliver some of these things, but it's going to be difficult. But nobody wants to hear that, because everybody thinks there is a new phenomena. It's called the government teat. The government produces wealth, and you can just feed off it. Governments don't produce wealth. They take wealth from you to deliver services. We decided that government should try and live within its means. And we took some pretty tough decisions. We said we're going to constrain expenditure. But we didn't reckon on a Senate that every time you wanted to save money, they deny you the opportunity to do it. And so we are on a trajectory. And I suppose I'd get into trouble by saying on an Argentinian trajectory. Our standard of living is inevitably going to decline because we are spending money we don't have. I might just say, by way of interest, some people are critical that we're now cutting back on overseas aid. One of the reasons that overseas aid was the subject of cutbacks is that there was no budget appropriation for it. And so you could take it out fairly easily. But there aren't many expenditures that the government makes, pensions, health, education, that are not the subject of enactments. We were on a pretty perilous path. And I tell you, on the other side, there is no understanding of the enormity of the difficulties that we face. And I'm not sure the public understand the difficulties we are facing. But I hope a group like you may think about the political agenda in the context of what I am now going to put to you. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull is an extraordinarily creative leader. He has been a very successful businessman himself. He has known how to budget. And he has had to think out, how are we going to be able to manage this difficult situation that we are in? And it wasn't by identifying new taxes, because I tell you, the more you go out and tax people, the less they'll be willing to work to try and make money. He knows he wasn't going to be able to reduce Commonwealth government expenditure because we'd be knocked back every time we took the proposals forward. And he came to a view that the only way in which we were going to be able to address these issues was to put incentives back into our political system to encourage people to be more creative, to work harder, and to generate extra wealth and opportunities. He recognised that if you put those incentives in place, you may in fact be growing the economy in a way which will lead to more people being employed. And if you've got more people being employed and more businesses being successful, you have the prospect of greater tax revenue. And it is in fact the most creative agenda that I have seen in a long time. We're not going to be able to get this up unless people understand that you need to create an environment in which wealth is going to be generated. It means that some of the tax cut proposals that might encourage people to invest and work harder are a very necessary part of what needs to be done. And so, my message is very simple. We do have a very clear agenda, and it's getting caught up in terms of, how much each particular proposal is going to cost and whether there's an appropriation for it and how much debt we're going to be left with. We are already in an extraordinarily perilous situation with the amount of debt that is out there. We are living beyond our means. But the only way in which we are going to be able to get out of that, in my view, in the political system in which we are operating, is by working our way out. And it means people in the business community need to be talking to their employees and convincing them that the return of the government is going to be absolutely essential. Because I tell you, if we were to go down the other route, there will be higher and higher taxes. There will be less and less investment in business. And there will be less employment. And we'll be collectively worse off. I think it's a very simple message. Sometimes I don't think it's explained as succinctly as I would hope. We get caught up in some of the argy-bargy, and people forget that this is a very, very important election. And, we are all able to influence outcomes. I know over 40 years in public life that every time you speak to somebody, they speak to somebody else. We like to think that it's all this new technology and the new media and that sort of thing. I don't think you can replace personal contact. And I hope that each and every one of you might be able to take this fairly simple message, I hope it's a simple message, back to the people that you are speaking with. I say this at risk to my own career, but I think it's absolutely essential for Australia. I got involved in public life 40 years ago because my father was an economist of some note. He had a master's degree, he topped Australia in accounting. During the war, he'd been in charge of price control. He had been a regulator. And he came out of that role absolutely convinced that the free market needed to be able to work and work effectively. And it was certainly something that had me, over a long time, convinced. And my father's example was a very important example to me. I came into public life because he started in the local council, serving the local community, got into state parliament. Tragically, we lost him at 62, but he was an exemplar. I think when you come into public life, you should be there to serve, not to serve yourself. I'm not sure we have everybody these days seeing the matter in that way. I was asked to comment by Stephen in terms of where I am going and why I have made some decisions I have. And I'll just share it with you for a moment. I've had the opportunity to serve Australia at the most senior level. I was for 10 years in a cabinet, 11 years in cabinet and ministry. I was Australia's longest serving immigration minister. I was Indigenous Affairs Minister. I was Attorney General. After the Howard government lost, I wasn't convinced that I would be called back. I think some people were looking at immigration issues afresh. They made some serious misjudgments, but I think some people may have been of the view that one way you could suggest that we were going in different directions would be not to have a Ruddock. That's the view I came to. And so I looked in the Parliament as to in what other ways I could serve. Tony Abbott asked me to be his Shadow Cabinet Secretary, and that was a privilege. He later asked me to be Chief Government Whip. He took it off me as well. And I got involved in a number of areas of public policy in which I have been passionately interested. I was privileged to be able to reform the Australian Parliamentarians Against the Death Penalty. I wear my amnesty badge with pride because I started the parliamentary group 40 years ago, and I do believe passionately that state executions have no place. I do believe that there can be prisoners of conscience. I do believe that people can be treated unfairly and tortured. I've had the opportunity to chair the Parliament's Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Human Rights. And in doing so, I've had an opportunity recently to finalise a report, a unique report, for Australia on the death penalty and how we might be able to influence these issues internationally. I had some other issues that I was interested in. I wasn't happy with the way in which some banks dealt with some of their clients. I participated in an inquiry in relation to impaired loans. And I have completed with colleagues a report on that matter. When I looked at the sorts of issues that I was progressing and passionately interested in, I had a difficult decision to make about my future. Where can I be most effective? Julie Bishop approached me and said, we want to be a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council. There are 40 states that are part of it. We've never had the opportunity to serve. But we need to work to achieve it. And if we're going to have a say internationally on important questions, rights of women and children, human rights institutions, parliamentary democracy, the rule of law, Indigenous people, the death penalty, where can you be most effective in pursuing those objectives you have to further people's human rights around the world? Well, winning a contest against Spain and France would be a good first step. And so I've been asked as Australia's first envoy for human rights to argue the case for Australia's election to the United Nations Human Rights Council. The view was that it's going to take a good deal of time It's going to take me away from Australia a good deal, and it wasn't going to be compatible with me remaining in the Parliament. Not an easy decision to make. Some people think that I might have beaten Billy Hughes's record. I was there for 43, almost 43 years, 42 and a half. Second longest serving parliamentarian in Australia's history. Some thought I might break the record. In my view, you're not there to break a record. I never expected to be in Parliament for 42 and a half years. And if you want to test that, what's my profession? Do you think I hold a practicing certificate?
No.
Well, you're wrong. I still hold a current practicing certificate because I never knew when I might need it. And I'm about to get, I've certainly got life membership, and I'm about to hit the 50-year mark, having renewed for this year. So I looked at it in terms of, I'm not there to break records. What can I do in the Parliament on these issues that I feel passionately about that will be more effective than me putting Australia in a leadership position on these questions internationally? And I came to the view that that was a unique and very special opportunity. So that's the explanation. It's very simple, very clear. And I hope when I go off to Oslo in about 3 weeks and I tell the international community gathered in Norway about the work of the Australian Parliament and how we might be able to work on these issues, I can encourage other states to be as vigorous in pursuing these changes as I have been. I don't know whether you have a sense of humour. I'll try. I got the American ambassador in. I mean, I think it's preposterous that in the leader of the free world, they still execute people. In the United States of America. And it is the case. I think this last year, 15 people were executed in the United States of America. I got the ambassador in and I said, Ambassador, I'm a good friend of America's, and I want you to know, as a good friend, that we don't like your policy. And we'd like you to report back to people that they should be doing something about it. I had the opportunity of meeting one of the most impressive Chinese ambassadors that Australia has ever had. China executes 2,000 people, we believe, annually. That's down on the 3.5 that it used to be. 1,000, that is. Madame Fu Ying, who became the ambassador to the United Kingdom, and then headed up the Vice Ministry in Foreign Affairs in Beijing, and is now a member of the People's Congress, chairing their Foreign Affairs Committee, was visiting Australia. I said, Madame Fu Ying, gee, it's great to see you. And Madame Fu Ying, I want you to know that I've just seen the American ambassador. And I've said to the American ambassador, America needs to get rid of the death penalty, and I'm telling you this as a friend. And I said, Madame Fu Ying, I want to speak to you as a friend and tell you China has to abolish the death penalty. I don't know how I'm going to go. I'm trying to do this diplomatically. Sometimes it's difficult, but it's a challenge, and if we can save one life, it'll be worthwhile. Thanks very much.